do you feel about what's going on with the Bishop of Moscow in regards to
Patriarch Kirill?
sprinkling the war weapons with holy water and
Yeah.
blessing their this conflict? What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, if you're asking my own personal feelings or opinions on it, I mean, I think that certainly it's nothing new historically for our bishops and priests to bless soldiers as they head off to war, and that's generally been defensive wars, especially in the Orthodox history. People always ask us Orthodox, how do you guys feel about the Crusades? And it's like, well, not so good, considering we were on the receiving end of them, at least in one or two instances. So I think that the general position of the church is that if your homeland has been invaded, then you can, as an Orthodox Christian husband and father, take up arms in defense of your family and your friends and your nation. And obviously the priests are going to pray that we're protected as we head into that conflict, not knowing whether we will be or not. Not knowing what the conclusion of that war will be and whether we'll even make it out of it alive or not. So I think that's the general position of the church. Now, whether an individual patriarch is choosing to do other things beyond that, it's not in my wheelhouse. I couldn't tell you whether there's any real precedence for that or not. I think that's a really good question, and I would have to ask some other people that are more knowledgeable than me regarding that, and if there's any history on that or not. I don't personally think it's really that weird. But I mean, because you have to understand, there's a difference for us between killing and murder. Killing is justified in some instances, whereas murder is never justified, right? So for us, there is a difference between those two things. And so this is why there is no Orthodox Christian justification for pacifism. We don't believe in pacifism. We believe that we should always try to seek a peaceful resolution, and that certainly we should try our best to avoid escalation, at all costs, if at all possible, and the mess that's going on in Ukraine with the war there, or the war between Gaza and Israel, which it sounds like any day now is going to kick off in Lebanon as well, from friends that I have who are on the ground over there in the Holy Land. These things are not good, obviously, and so at the end of the day, we Orthodox Christians in the laity, we simply pray for peace. We pray that God will protect the Orthodox Christians in Russia and Ukraine, that He'll protect the Orthodox Christians in Gaza and Israel and Lebanon, and that these conflicts would not just go on and on and on and on. So anyway, that's just kind of my 2 cents, for whatever that's worth.
Sure. Okay, so this is the first problem, right, that I've found with the Orthodox Church, is if we read the quotes having to do with war from the pre-Nicene Church, we find no instances where war of any kind, killing of any kind, is permissible in the sight of God or in the sight of the church. Are you familiar with the early church? Have you read much of the ante-Nicene fathers?
I'm not on that specific topic, but yeah, I've certainly read a decent amount of Saint Justin Martyr or Saint Polycarp or Saint Ignatius of Antioch and some others.
May I ask you, Ephraim, if you've
But
read
I would,
anyone?
but I would also say real quick that I believe that there is a biblical justification for fighting defensively and ultimately for taking life.
Yeah.
God institutes our position is that God institutes the death penalty in Genesis chapter 9. That St. Paul upholds it in Romans chapter 13. And that while you could say there was some disagreement between some of the church fathers as to what position a person should take on the death penalty or whatever, that I don't personally see the biblical justification for straight up pacifism.
Well, if I could real quick, Ephraim,
Sure.
I find from my own investigation of the Church Fathers' writings, including Justin Martyr especially, but all of them, a consistency, not a disagreement on the subject. And they have a harmony. This is how they would harmonize it. From what I've read, and we could review the quotes if we want to, but the sections where we can find them talking about this. But they would say, Yes, Paul is completely, we accept what Paul says. Paul is completely correct. The government doesn't wield the sword in vain. It fulfills a purpose in this life, and God has a use for the government. However, Christians do not take part in that. We would not be allowed to execute anybody who is a criminal, even if it is carried out by the government. Or if we are in the military, if a person should become a Christian and they're in the military, they have to, they're never allowed to take an oath, and they're never allowed to take a man's life if they're ever ordered to. That's in Hippolytus's apostolic tradition.
Okay.
Right. I mean,
yeah. I'll be very honest with you. I'll be very honest with you guys. This isn't exactly a topic that particularly interests me. I mean, I understand you take a different position, but
well, it's not about whether we find it interesting. It's more.
No. Well, let me be more specific. You think it's important. I don't. So, I mean, that's the difference.
Well, I have a question for you, Ephraim, if you don't mind, Don. Is there any possibility, Ephraim, that the early church's view, if it's different, is something to be concerned about? If the early church did teach for hundreds of years that killing is not allowed for Christians, and especially not war, wouldn't that be concerning?
The difference is that I don't believe there's such a thing as the early church, and that the Orthodox Church is somehow different from that.
Well, a lot of Orthodox do admit that the early church teaches things differently, but they believe that doctrines had to evolve over time.
Well, doctrines may evolve, but dogma never does.
Do you teach in the Orthodox Church that if a person kills, he's not allowed to have communion, even if he killed in self-defense?
For a period of time, he'd be placed under penance.
And why would you have to do penance for something if it's not a sin, may I ask?
But who said it's not a sin?
So it is a sin to kill even in self-defense?
Yeah, taking another human being's life, whether it's a justified killing or unjustified killing, is a sin. That's correct.
I see, but doesn't that seem to be a contradiction to say it's a sin and that it's justified?
What is a sin?
Killing somebody in self-defense.
No, that's not what I asked. What is sin?
Disobeying God's law.
Sure, yeah. We would call it a movement away from the will of God. Certainly.
Well, it's quite a different thing to have to do some ritual cleansing and not being allowed to touch the people or be around them until some ritual cleansing is done. But we're talking about the Eucharist, that you are effectively outside of communion and must do penance if you've killed someone. And this is how we treat someone who's committed a sin, and you admit it's a sin. And you're saying it's also justified at the same time, right? That you kill somebody in self-defense.
I'm saying that there's a difference between a justified killing and an unjustified killing. If I see that someone has broken into my house in the middle of the night and they're raping one of my daughters, right? I'm going to do everything within my power to stop them and get them out of my house. If they're armed with a gun, right? That shows a pretty sincere intent on their part to cause chaos.
Certainly.
Right, in my home. So I'm not going to be a pacifist and say, well, he'll finish raping her in about 5 or 10 minutes and maybe he'll leave after he steals my television, and just sit there and wait. Right. So I think there are instances in which it is acceptable and permissible to take someone's life if it has to be escalated to that point.
Understood, but is it still a sin, though?
Now, is what a sin?
To kill that rapist.
Yes, because you're taking a human being's life.
And that is consistent.
That's obviously not a good. That's not a good thing. That's obviously not a good.
If I can ask a question, then, so it sounds like you're saying that there's such a thing as justifiable sin. Is that accurate?
Well, no. I mean, look, it's not a good thing to take somebody's life, but there are instances in which we may feel that we have no choice. We may be in a situation in which we can't. It's unavoidable. Right, we're trying to do a greater good, right?
Would it be morally evil to not kill the rapist?
Would it be morally evil to not kill the rapist?
Yes, like in the scenario, the hypothetical that you provided just a moment
Well,
ago, a man
look,
breaks into the house.
and this is why I don't like delving into all these hypotheticals, because it's just endless rabbit trails. Because there's what if this is the situation? What if that is the situation? What if I brandish my gun and the rapist flees because he realizes that all he has is a 9mm pistol, and I'm holding a shotgun at him, and it's going to put a big 2-foot hole in his gut, right? Like, so I mean, we could sit here and just run hypotheticals all night long. I don't want to do that. Our time is
Well,
precious and short.
I get it. That's fine. But just like in a simple like
Yeah.
if you can answer it, like is it sin though to let the rapist do that thing to not stop him?
If you had the ability to stop him, even if it meant just grabbing him from behind and choking him out, and you didn't do that, I would think that that would be considered pretty sinful, because all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing, right? So I think that you should at least try to do something. It doesn't mean that you have to take the person's life. As I already said, you have to determine in the situation what is warranted, right? It's just like they do that in the military and in law enforcement, right? It's called escalation. And there's different levels. It's like, okay, if this is happening, what do you do? Well, you do this. What if this happens? Well, then you move it up a notch, move it up a notch, and you keep moving it up until, if you have to use lethal force, you do, right? So
Well, this is very educational, Ephraim. It's very educational for Don. I don't know if Don had ever heard before that the Orthodox Church teaches it is a sin to kill in self-defense even, but that it is also justifiable and that you have no choice. You said you have no choice but to do it.
I'm saying in some instances there may not be a choice, right?
Well, I will
That's
just
what I'm
let
saying,
you
is there
know.
may not be a choice. Are you a pacifist? Let's just cut to the quick. Are you a pacifist?
Oh, clearly, yes. We represent the early
Okay,
church.
yeah, obviously. Well, yeah, and you can, and that's fine. You can say that.
And they
I
do.
understand. I
They
understand
do.
what you're saying.
The early
Yeah.
church does talk about the issue, Ephraim. They actually dealt with that exact same scenario you're talking about, and they address it. And they say, they were being arrested by the Romans all the time, and the Romans were given free rein to torture them and rape their wives and their children in front of them. And they considered it a command to do nothing, and they did let them do that. And they considered it to be the greatest reward to suffer that kind of injury. And
Yeah, yeah, I understand that. Some people are called to confession, some people are called to martyrdom, and some are not. I understand. I get that.
well, there is a choice. That's what I wanted to make sure you're aware of. There clearly is a choice. All of us can choose
And
to
I
fight
said,
or not.
and I said there's a choice, but I disagree with your pacifism, and it's as simple as that. So, what other topics do you guys want to discuss? Because we're not going to get anywhere on that.
That's all right. We can move on to another subject, but thank you for being very candid with us about it. And I do think, I know you're talking about lots of different scenarios, but just for any future discussion we're having here, I think it actually is the best thing to do what you did, bringing up the most extreme circumstance, because that is when we can really establish a principle. A principle has to hold up under even the most extreme example to test that philosophy, see if it holds up under serious scrutiny. So, of course, you used the most extreme example, and we're saying, yes, the early church addressed that, and they still said we must remain pacifists. And Don, since you're leading this, you can bring up any other subject that you had concerns about with the Orthodox Church.
So here's a question. I have a question myself that I want you to answer. You keep using the phrase early church. What is the early church? How do you define it? What do you